Awesome, guys. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This session is going to be particularly useful for any of you who identify as high performers. This training is going to be specifically for people who are dealing with anxiety around the concept of high performance. And I think that you're going to find it pretty useful. This is a little bit close to home for me because when I think about my own mental health journey, there were kind of two major chapters to it. The first chapter was when I had really debilitating anxiety and then corresponding depression that was suicidal in my teens. Went through the traditional hospitalization, therapy, medication, all of that stuff. I was able to really live without anxiety and depression after learning how to retrain my brain. The therapy and medication and those types of things didn't really work well for me, but I learned a new method of how to retrain the brain. That worked great. And then really, I didn't have any substantial anxiety or depression for really since then. But there was one period of my life where my mental health did struggle a little bit. And that was in my early to mid 20s when I was facing a lot of insecurities, basically, about who I thought I had to be. And I felt like I wasn't living up to the expectations. I felt like I wasn't good enough. And a lot of it came down to ideals I had about how much I needed to be achieving. And I think that there's a portion of those people out there, people in our audience and our community, and you're probably listening right now, where a lot of your anxiety stems from this feeling that you're not doing good enough, you're not being good enough, you're not doing enough, right? Maybe like enough activity. You might be the type of person that feels like you have to be busy all the time, that you haven't really earned the right to relax. You might be the type of person where even when you do really well and people compliment you and tell you, hey, good job, you're just looking at the faults. You're finding what you didn't do. You're paying way more attention to the imperfections, to the flaws. You have a really tough time feeling grateful for what you have because your mind is always thinking about the next thing that you need to be working on. Perhaps you identify as like a workaholic. Perhaps you're the type of person who really contemplates that your self-worth is tied up with how much you make or how much you achieve or how much you do, how many of other people's problems you really solve, that sort of thing. And so if any of that you can relate to, go ahead and let me know in the comments. If you could put yes in the comments, it'd greatly help me to understand who we're talking to tonight. And I'm going to give you 7 tips, both ones that I have found to work incredibly well for giving me the peace of mind that I really need in those areas, alleviating that sort of performance and high-performing anxiety. And then also ones that I've been working on with clients that have worked incredibly well. Some of these are pretty short and quick and to the point. I think this overall session will be pretty quick, but I think each one of these are pretty heavy-hitting things, okay? So these are my recommendations for you. So if you are feeling like you've got anxiety around being a high performer, trying to be a high performer, here are 7 little tips that you can use. Number 1 is to get the word should out of your vocabulary. So one of the key things that we teach at mentalhealthcoaching.com with each one of our clients is that all anxiety, all mental health problems stem from patterns of communication that we have with ourselves and that we have with other people. And one principle that we live by is that how you talk about yourself to yourself and to other people is how you show up in life. So a lot of times people fall into habits and routines where they are using should, the word should, very liberally. And they're putting the word should on themselves for, it could be all sorts of things. It could be about other people's problems. So you'll tell yourself, oh, I should be doing more. I should call that person more. I should help out. I should take the burden off of their shoulders. I should be the one that's cooking dinner. I should be the one that's cleaning the house. I should be the one that's doing that project at work. And so typically when people have anxiety around performance, they use the word should a lot, and they fall into this habit of what we call shoulding all over yourself. And that becomes a big, big problem. That's not good. And what I have found is if you can train yourself to replace that word with either the word I will or I won't, okay, that becomes a really powerful technique for alleviating a lot of anxiety. So instead of saying, for example, what a lot of people do is they'll say something like this. They'll say, oh, I should work out. If you just kind of roll that sentence inside of your head a little bit, I should work out, that probably does not make you feel very compelled to actually go and work out. It makes you feel like you ought to. It makes you feel a sense of guilt or shame if you don't, but it doesn't particularly make you feel like you're going to go and do it. It makes you feel like, yeah, gosh, I really should, but I'm not going to, but I should, right? And so if you can train yourself to literally get rid of that word and trade it for will or won't. So you say, you know what, I will work out. Or it would even be better for you to just say, you know what, I won't work out today, but I will 2 days from now. It'd be better for you to train yourself to be definitive and decisive. Are you going to do it or are you not going to do it? Because should is procrastinator language. Should is perfectionist language, and there really is no such thing as a perfectionist. There's only procrastinators that are playing the part. And so we got to get rid of that word. Changing that word alone will get rid of a lot of anxiety, okay? Number 2 recommendation I have for you is to get rid of the phrase have to. Have to is another one of these what we call poisonous vocabulary words or phrases. It will induce anxiety for you every time that you use it, if you say have to. So again, what you want to do instead is say I will, I won't, or I choose to. That would be the alternative. And if you think about this, we tend to tell ourselves I have to do things a lot when they're actually things that we are choosing to do. Right? And you may even say like, oh, I have to pick up the kids, I have to do the laundry, I have to this, I have to that. But the reality is these are things that you are choosing. These are things that you're choosing to do. Now, you may feel that they are an obligation and a responsibility, but if you can remember that the life that you're living right now, whether you intended to or not, is a life that you have chosen. Right? The way in which you're speaking are words that you have chosen. The beliefs that you believe are things that you've reinforced over time. You may have created the life that you're living right now very unconsciously. You may not have intended to create the life that you're living right now. But the life that you're living right now is one that you have created through the reinforcement of actions and habits and patterns. And so if we want to put you back in control, one of the key things that we have to do to put you back in control is to help you remember the incredible amount of choice that you actually have in your daily life. The choice of what to focus on, the choice of what to do, the choice of what to tell yourself, the choice of what to believe, the choice of what to spend your energy on, the choice of people that you surround yourself with, the choice of things that you put into your brain, the media that you consume, the choice of things you put into your brain in terms of the thoughts that you generate and reinforce on a daily basis. There's so many things that you're choosing to do. You may be choosing them unconsciously, but if you can kind of reclaim that and go, you know what, I actually have a lot of things that I can choose at a more deliberate, conscious level that will give you a higher level of mental health and fulfillment. There's no such thing as somebody who feels totally anxious who simultaneously believes that they are the one in charge of their life. I have only encountered people who have incredibly debilitating anxiety where they've convinced themselves that they are not the ones in charge of their life. And the way that we get ourselves to a point of being convinced that we are not the ones in charge of our life is when we use words like should or have to. Okay, so can you guys let me know in the comments, do you use either one of these two, should or have to? Like up until now, have you used either one of those? And by the way, that's another little pro tip I'd give you, is any little pattern that you've noticed is unhealthy of yours, go ahead and put the words up until now on that pattern. So you could say, yeah, so instead of saying, I am always incredibly harsh with myself, I am always incredibly negative, I am always blah, 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 what you'd instead want to say is, up until now, I have had a pattern of being negative. Up until now, I have had a pattern of procrastinating. Up until now, I have had a pattern of telling myself I should do things rather than I will or I won't. So if you use the phrase up until now, it helps you take your current pattern that's causing you a problem and put it into the past, and you will start to feel a detachment from that. So that's a little bonus technique for you guys. Okay, I love the comments. Keep the comments coming. Zenoba says, that's how I used to feel, like I had no control. And so Zenoba, one thing that would be interesting for you to contemplate is how you shifted the language that you used when you really felt a lack of control compared to, hopefully now it sounds like you're saying you feel more in control. You're changing a lot of your language, which is really good. And I love that what you just put in the comments. Up until now, I used to have a pattern of thinking negatively. I love that. That's the perfect type of language that you want to use. One thing that I get asked a lot of times is people will say, well, Ty, how have you lived without anxiety or depression for 15 years? And I'll tell them that I only refer to anxiety and depression in the past tense. I want you guys to lean in really closely and hear me right now, because this is really important. If you only refer to your problems in the past tense, eventually that's exactly what they become. They become past tense. And so there are times in my life where I feel stressed. There are times in my life where I feel challenged. There are times in my life where I feel sad. But I never use the labels depressed. I never use the word anxious. I never use the word panic anymore. Because I don't use those labels, my brain does not have the ability to generate the feelings. Your brain can only generate feelings based off of the words that you use. Okay, so if you change the words that you use, you change the feelings that you have. Okay, the third technique for high performers, okay, this is, which let me have you write it down first, and then I'll explain, because it's a little, there's a little to this, okay? Basically, it's focusing on getting a win rather than being in a state of winning. And this is the common mistake that people make, high achievers, high performers make. What I learned, it took me a long time to realize this, but particularly if you live in the United States, you have been culturally conditioned to focus on end points, to focus on end goals, to focus on completion, to focus on getting the gold star, getting the A plus, getting the trophy, winning the game, okay? It is honestly amazing that it took me so long to figure this out, but I realized that this is kind of like a meta pattern of thinking. It's a way in which many people are so accustomed to thinking, but it took me until I turned 30 to realize, like, wow, I am constantly focusing on end points. I keep focusing on completion. And the thing that was fascinating about this is I realized that I was trying to grow this business, this coaching business, to the next level. And I was running into some roadblocks. Like, I kept feeling stuck. And I got some mentorship. I hired a coach because, one thing I really believe is that the level of thinking that you're bringing to the problem is never going to be sufficient to get you out of the problem. And if you want to solve a problem, you need somebody else who's got a different level of thinking than you currently have. Otherwise, you'll just feel like you're trying to push against a brick wall forever. So I hired a coach, and the business coach basically was looking at what I did on a daily, regular basis. And he basically called me out. He was like, well, wait a minute, how do you actually spend your time during the week? And I told him that I do a lot of coaching sessions with clients, and I work a lot on creating social media content. And, I kind of gave him the whole list of things that I do. And he said, well, how much time do you actively spend promoting and advertising and selling, your program? And I was like, not that much. And he said, but that's the number one thing that you're missing to actually move the business to the next level. And when he said this, I was like, well, yeah, duh, I know that. But basically what he helped me realize is that I kept doing the things in the business that I already felt that I was successful at. And I was avoiding doing the things that would actually be the needle movers because I was subconsciously afraid and scared I wasn't going to be successful at that. And once he pointed that out to me, I started seeing this hugely with my clients who identify as high performers. What really my high performing clients, my people who identify with that label of high performers, really what they are people who don't allow themselves the option to sit still. They believe that they have to constantly be in a state of motion and doership. But what they're usually doing is they're kind of shuffling, they're kind of straightening the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. They're spending a lot of time and a lot of energy on things that don't actually really matter in the grand scheme of their overall quality of life. They are usually avoiding doing the really, really obvious thing that would make their life a whole lot better, but it's that thing that they feel a little scared about or a little uncertain about. If any of you guys can relate to this, please let me know in the comments. I know it's a little advanced, but I think if you get this, this could be a game changer for you. The question I'd want you to ask yourself is, A, what is the thing that you routinely spend more energy on than you need to just to get that quick sense of completion, to get that quick win, even though it's not really the thing you need to be doing? And B, what is the thing that you avoid spending time on doing that if you did spend your time on it, it would absolutely radically improve your quality of life? And what I've realized is that when we focus on just trying to get wins, we end up going for these things that are really quick completion type things. Have you ever been the type of person where there's this thing you really truly need to do, but then you just go clean your room instead of going and making the sales call or doing whatever it is you need to do? I've done that. And it's because you're trying to go for a win. You're obsessed with a win so much so that you're avoiding doing the things that won't give you the immediate payoff. So instead, And admittedly, I got this language from this coach that I was just talking about, but I'm passing it on to you. What he told me is, look, don't focus on getting a win. Instead, focus on winning. And that stuck with me, and I was like, winning is like a perpetual state. Winning is something that you can do even as soon as you wake up in the morning, right? You can be in a state of winning. And I know for the high performing people out there, you'll probably relate to this language of winning. It's not something every person is going to relate to. But rather than trying to focus on the individual win, be in a state of winning. That has really helped me a lot alleviate that anxiety around performance. So I hope that helps you guys. All right, number 4 tactic, strategy, okay, is focus on finishing lines instead of starting lines. This is a big mistake people make, creates a lot of anxiety. Pretty much goes off what I was just saying. Society has really trained us to go after those finish lines, like graduations, for example, right? Like the reason why we have this cultural thing of senioritis when you're a senior in high school and you're antsy and itching to kind of like complete high school. We talk about these things culturally with our kids growing up. Oh, you're going to finish middle school, as opposed to like you're going to start high school, right? Or you're going to start your career, you're going to start adulthood. And I think that creates a lot of not just like anxiety for people, but also depression even, because then you get to the finish line and part of you thinks like, is this all there is? Like, what's after this? What do I do next? And so one big mental reframe that has helped me hugely break out of the toxic nature of my old high-performing mindset, where it was a very anxiety-filled high-performing mindset, and now I'm able to be very high-performing and very productive, but not in an anxiety-filled way, like in a way where it feels joyous and exciting and all those things, is I'm just focused on starting lines. So like, for example, this past month, let me give you an example. So about a year ago, when I was looking at our company and our business, I was looking at like, why are we not at a certain amount of followers that I would like to be at, like a certain number of members in our Facebook group and so forth. I was looking at a finish line, right? Like, well, if we could just get to this number, then our community would be really large and we'd be, we'd have, et cetera, right? I was just focused on the finish line. Now I'm focused much more on starting lines. Like this past month, I've been like, you know what? Like, let's help our client success team like really create a massively world-class experience for our clients. And let's begin the process of doing that. Like, let's like take the client delivery of value to a whole nother level where we absolutely are like the best in the world at what we do. And I mean, we pretty much were already kind of at that level, but like we weren't living up to my standards. So creating the starting line of like, let's really like begin that process. And it's going to be an ongoing process. It's going to be an iterative process that like in a sense never ends, like we can always do better, but let's start that and be okay with the fact that we're starting that as opposed to we need to try to obsess over finishing it. So that has helped me regain a lot more excitement and enthusiasm around things as opposed to just wanting to get everything done, which I think creates a lot of anxiety. So focus on starting lines rather than finish lines is my recommendation to you. All right, number 5. These, the way I wrote these in my notes is, if you haven't figured it out already, these are basically like the mistakes to avoid making. So number 1 is using the word should. Number 2, using the phrase have to. Number 3, focusing on getting a win rather than being in a state of winning. Number 4, focusing on finishing lines rather than starting lines. Number 5 mistake I see that high performers do that creates anxiety is feeling joy from achievement, but not making your self-worth contingent on achievement. So that's actually what you need to do, not the mistake. So let me explain. What most people do, let me say it this way. Most people, they equate their self-worth with whether they are achieving things or not. So if they are achieving things, they feel good about themselves. If they're not achieving things, they feel like they're a piece of shit. And I certainly have done that many times in my life. Like when I look back, especially in my 20s, when I was feeling the best about myself, it was only during periods where everything was going really well and sort of the external mile markers were being met, right? Like the money was coming in, the company was growing. In my previous career, I was running a nonprofit, so it was like we were raising money and we were growing. And if those metrics were being hit, I felt really, really good about myself. If the organization that I was leading at the time, whether it was the nonprofit I used to run or this company, If it was not going well, then I felt like I was garbage. So I basically was equating my self-worth with the achievement. And this goes to one of the three biggest sources of all emotional pain, which is what we call the distortion of circumstances. The distortion of circumstances, it's the distortion of self, not distortion of circumstances. And the distortion of self is, if I did a bad thing, that means I am a bad person. Right? And you can trade the word bad for whatever. Like if I did a dumb thing, I am a dumb person, right? If I looked ugly today, I am an ugly person, right? Something like that. So when we are not achieving things, when things are not coming together, it's very tempting to say, I'm a failure, right? So you distort it. Instead of it just being like, I failed, I made a mistake, you instead internalize it and you personalize it and you make it about your identity. And that is one of the fastest ways to feel a ton of anxiety or depression, really, really debilitating things. So what we have to do is break that mental habit of defining it as a problem with our identity, as a problem of who we are, and instead focus on the what, not the who, right? Same thing in relationships, by the way. One of the biggest problems that happens in relationships is the habit of criticism. The habit of criticism is when, say, like your partner leaves a dish in the sink and you say to your partner, like, why do you never clean up after yourself? As opposed to, hey, honey, you left your dish in the sink. Would you mind taking care of your dish in the sink? So when you go from making the comment about the what, which would be the dish in the sink, and instead you make it about who, and you say, hey, why do you never clean up after yourself? That is a big distortion of reality, and that really damages relationships because the person on the receiving end now feels like you are attacking who they are as opposed to the action that they made, right? That's why one of the most healing things you can do in relationships is the opposite of that. So if somebody is saying to themselves, I'm a failure, I'm a piece of shit, I never, I'm a mean person, and you go to them and you say, that's not true. That's not who you really are. You're not a mean person. Like, yes, maybe what you said at the party earlier tonight was not the nicest thing, but that one little thing you said is not who you are. You are at your core a really nice, kind person. So we have to be able to separate between our actions and then our identity. And a lot of people are not good at that. They're very imprecise with their language. So getting back to the whole idea of high performance, if we equate our actions, our achievements with our identity, that's a really big problem because you're going to start to think that these external mile markers are the indicator of whether you are good enough or not. And those external mile markers, by the way, are very often not even things that you can control. So for example, what I used to do with the nonprofit that I ran is like if our field program is what we called it, if our field program was not measuring up to the expected metrics that we had, I would kind of internalize it and be like, I'm a failure. But the thing is, that field program consisted of hundreds of people, right? So it's not like I'm going to be able to control every single action that every single person who's a part of this organization does. So it makes pretty much no sense for me to language it as I am a failure. So here's the real key, and this is what I coach my clients to do, is the following. I said it earlier before, but let me say it again, because this is the antidote to this problem. The antidote is to train yourself to feel joy from achievement, but to not make your self-worth contingent on the achievements. So here's another way of saying that might sound a little simpler. Enjoy it when you achieve things, but don't require achievement in order to feel good about yourself. That's the key. It's the requiring of the achievement in order to then give yourself self-love that really screws you up. If you withhold self-love from yourself and only give it to yourself sparingly when you achieve really big things, that's the habit that's going to cause you a lot of problems. And that's the thing that we've got to break. So the trick is to learn how to make your self-worth non-negotiable, to give yourself self-love when you make mistakes, when you do well, when you achieve things, when you try really hard but you don't necessarily achieve things. Like every step in that cycle, you need to learn to be more unconditionally loving to yourself. Definitely is easier said than done, but that is kind of the key thing that you got to learn how to do, okay? I see somebody, is saying that that's been your habit till now. I appreciate you just modified the language. Up until now, you've had a habit of doing that. Yes, very good. Okay, cool. Number 6, we're almost done. Got 2 left here, and then I'll answer any questions if we have them. Number 6 is getting your values clear, not just living in alignment with society's values. So for those of you who are new to our community, you may not know, but one of the questions that I often ask people to help them get to the root of where their anxiety or other mental health problems has come from, especially if they felt like they have anxiety or depression for a really long period, is I'll ask them, growing up, whose love did you crave more, your mom's or your dad's? And it is usually the parent whose love was less freely available, to kind of give you a shortcut to that. And then the next question is, okay, well, who did you have to be, or who did you believe that you had to be in order to get that love? And there are kind of 7 big common answers to that question. One of the common answers to that question is an achiever, right? So for example, let's say the person you craved love from was your dad, and who you had to be, or who at least you thought you had to be in order to get your dad's love, was you needed to achieve things. You needed to like score the winning goal in the soccer game. You needed to come home with an A+. You needed to be the head of the debate team, right? You needed to win the competition, right? Whatever it is. And so if you felt that as a child, you got reinforced, you got positive reinforcement for achieving things, you got negative reinforcement when you failed to achieve things, then, excuse me, then you could have gotten reinforced for basically like what your dad's values were. And those aren't necessarily what your values are. They were just your dad's values, right? Now your dad's values could become your values. Like maybe you love your dad. Maybe you want your dad's values to be your values, at least in part. That's fine. But the point is, we just want to make sure that you're not living your life on autopilot. We want to make sure that you haven't just basically programmed yourself to chase after the things that your parents or society has taught you that you're supposed to chase after. Let me tell you another good example. I had a client once, and she was a woman, and she was in her, I think, early to mid-30s, and she was deeply depressed and anxious. And come to find out, the big reason she was deeply depressed and anxious was that she was having some fertility issues. Okay, and for the women out there who have dealt with this, it's a very sensitive thing. It can impact you emotionally hugely. At some level, I will never know what it's like to go through that, obviously, as a man. However, a great number of my clients are women. I've helped them through this particular issue, so I've got a decent appreciation for what women go through when they go through that. But anyway, long story short, she was all stressed out, all depressed, all anxious because she was having fertility issues. She wanted to be able to have a child, and but then one thing came out of her mouth one day that surprised the hell out of me. And she was like all hysterical. And she said, and I mean, I've never even wanted to have kids in the first place, is what she said. And I was like, wait a minute, hold on a second, back up. What did you just say? And she said, yeah, I mean, I've just never even wanted to have kids in the first place. And I said, well, hold on a second, why are we so stressed out about being able to have kids then? And we stuck with it for a minute. And I said, where did this expectation occur that you have to have children, that you should and have to have children? And she realized that it was her mother who had kind of put that on her, and who kept always telling her, like, oh, I hope you have a family. You need to get a family. Are you getting with a guy who's going to be able to give you a family? Blah, blah, blah. And her mom, it wasn't that she even wanted kids. What she had done was she had gotten into a pattern of always trying to be who her mother wanted her to be. And that was driving her totally bonkers and crazy, to the point that she was now going to try to get pregnant and have kids that she didn't even want to have, because that's what her mother wanted. And the lines had gotten so blurry. She was so used to going for what her mother wanted her to do. She thought that what her mother wanted for her was the same thing as what she wanted. And that conversation was the first moment where I was able to help my client see, like, you have never even learned how to really think for yourself. And I didn't mean it as a criticism. I was like, your mother basically trained you to only do what she wanted you to do. Like, it's time for us to ask the questions you've never asked yourself. Like, what do you really want? And sometimes for my high performing people out there, They've just been chasing after what society has conditioned them to chase after. They've convinced themselves some way, somehow, whether it was their family or a group of people they got with in high school or college or their peers, or maybe they started working for a company really young, or it doesn't really matter. Maybe they picked it up from a TV show, but sometimes we are not really living the life we want to live. We are basically like trying out for a role that we don't even want. It's almost like we're auditioning for a role in a play that isn't even who we really are. We're trying to become a character that isn't really who we are. So anyway, I just encourage you as a high performer to really ask yourself, like, are you really chasing after what you want, Because it's totally cool. Like, I just worked with a woman a couple months ago, and she had been this high performer her whole life. And I said, look, like, it's just you and me talking, right? Like, forget your parents, forget society, forget what you think sounds appropriate, forget what you think you should want. Tell me, what do you really want? And what she said is, I want to be a housewife. That's what she said. Now, up until that point, she had been working 4 jobs because she thought she had to be working all the time. She had to constantly be in a state of motion. But she said, I want to be a housewife. I want to be a kept woman, is what she said. That was the phrase she used. I want to stay at home. I want to have a husband who provides. I want to raise kids. That's what I want. And she said, but my mother and my father would never have approved of me wanting that. I was like, too fucking bad. That's what you want. And the fastest way to be miserable is to try to be someone other than who you really are. So if what you really want deep down is to be a housewife and raise kids and not work, but yet you're like trying to be this like super badass like career woman, you're going to be miserable. You're going to have anxiety. So it's just important to figure out what your values really are. My clients and I go through this 3-week process. We call it the values clarification process. And it is amazing because we help you figure out like what all of your old values are and what your new values need to be. We do kind of an abbreviated version of that on my free coaching sessions that we give out to anybody. We give one free coaching session out to anybody in our online community. So if you guys are interested in that, just go to mentalhealthcoaching.com and I can teach you that, or just put session in the comments and we're happy to set that up for you. Okay, so that's the number 6 way to alleviate high performance anxiety. Okay, number 7 is, and this kind of wraps it all up, is playing the game from the inside out. Playing the game of life, I should say, from the inside out rather than from the outside in. So if you want to alleviate performance anxiety, high performance anxiety, you've got to learn how to play the game of life from the inside out, not the outside in. So what I mean is, again, not making your self-worth contingent on the external markers, like how much you earn, how much you've achieved, whether people approve of you, whether you're getting the job or the promotion, or it's all coming together. Those are all external things. Those are things you don't have control over. And so what a lot of people are doing without realizing it is they are playing the game of life from the outside in. The only way that they allow themselves to feel like they're winning is if all of these things that are outside of their control magically come to be the way that they expect them to be. And that is a disaster. That's a way to ensure that you're going to be anxious and depressed for your whole life. What you've got to learn to do instead is learn to rewrite the rules such that you're playing the game of life from the inside out, so that you get to feel like you're winning every single day, almost every single moment, right? And the way to do that is to change the measurement that you're using for success. If the measurement for success is how often am I getting promoted, how much money am I making, how much do people approve of me, etc., you're always going to feel like the mile marker is moving and you're never really going to feel satisfied. But if you make the measurement of success your inputs rather than the outputs, the game of life changes dramatically. So if you make the measurement like, okay, how well did I give my best? Did I try my hardest? Did I really try to do the good thing for that person? Did I go for it? Did I take a risk? Did I apply myself? Did I learn something? Did I continue to grow? Right? Those types of things. I can give you a couple examples in my life. One was I used to be really obsessed with the amount of money I was making. Now I'm more so focused on, am I doing the things that will grow the business, that will lead to making money, right? Like that becomes a much better way of measuring success. I'll give you another example. I used to have this measurement where I used to say, if a client doesn't totally turn their entire life around after a single 90-minute session, I failed. which is just ridiculous, right? Like, I'm not totally in control of the client's life. I can greatly influence them, but I can't control them. Now my mile marker, my measurement is, did I do everything in my power on that session with the client to help them? And did I make a difference? Did I at least move the needle further towards an anxiety-free life? It may take me multiple sessions to do it. It might take me a couple months to help somebody live an anxiety-free life, but did I get them closer, right? That's something that I am in control of. That's something that I can control with my inputs. So think about like playing a board game. You would never want to play a board game where the only way you win is if everybody else does exactly what they're supposed to do and then you get to win. You would want to play a board game where you get to be the one in charge of whether you win. And the only way you do that is by making it based off of your inputs rather than your outputs. So if you're dealing with high-performing anxiety, chances are you're placing way too much of an emphasis on external expectations, external opinions, external approval, whether it be society or your parents or your boss or whomever, and you haven't actually begun to learn how to play the game from the inside out. And that's the only way to live a life without anxiety, where you really truly are the master of your own mental health. So anyway, that's our session for this week. If you guys are interested, October is at an end. I'm filming this on Halloween right now. We're opening up November enrollment right now for clients. And basically how it works is if you're selected to be a client, I work with you one-on-one to make sure your anxiety is reduced by a minimum of 75% to your satisfaction within 90 days. If you don't feel like we've met that threshold within 90 days, I continue to work with you one-on-one for free until you do. And then also, if after the first 7 days of using our anxiety elimination system, you are not 100% sure it is the right thing for you, then you get to get a complete total refund and walk away. So we are taking applications now. We are probably going to fill up after this week. So if you are interested in applying, then here's the thing. So you have to be someone who's taking your mental health really seriously, okay? I do not work with people who are just looking to cope with anxiety. I only work with people who want to eliminate their anxiety. That's number one. Number two, you have to be the type of person who recognizes that you're going to need to put in some time and some effort on this for at least a couple of months. It doesn't take a lot, really. It only takes about like 3 to 5 hours of doing the right homework and sort of things like that, practicing the right skills each week for about 90 days. After the 90 days is up, it only takes about 10 minutes a day for relapse prevention. But you need to be somebody who's willing to do that. You must also either be a working salaried professional or married to a working salaried professional. Okay, those are the 3 requirements. But if that's you, go ahead and put apply in the comments. Or if you're listening on our podcast later, then go ahead and go to mentalhealthcoaching.com. You can submit your application. Like I said, we only have a couple slots. We're pretty full at the moment. So it'll probably fill up within about a week. But if you want to get your application in, that's the way to do that. If you're on our live stream right now and you put apply in the comments, we'll go ahead and shoot you a message, book a quick 10-minute call, make sure it's a good fit, and then explain all the details and make sure it's all good and make sure we set you up to succeed. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. I'll see you next Thursday. See ya. Bye.